on what they think about Cyberpunk 2077. I mean, it's coming up. It's right around the corner, the biggest game of all time, potentially. And one top streamer in particular, Shroud, says that he hopes the game dies in a month. Oh, you just got to see the clip yourself. Check it out.
To discover when you play it for yourself on December 10th.
Cyberpunk will die in a month? I hope so. I hope it's not larger than a month. It's a fucking single player game. I don't want to be spending fucking my whole life in here, you know? I want to be spending just enough time and then get out, you know?
The gameplay will be switching between Xbox One
and why live stream to one platform when you can simultaneously live stream to every platform to discover new audiences faster using restream.io. Yeah, so there it is. Top streamer on Twitch is saying that he hopes this game will die in a month. Is Shroud some sort of Cyberpunk 2077 hating villain? Or is this highlighting some greater strategic point about Cyberpunk 2077? I mean, if you look at the top streamers on Twitch, boys, none of them are playing single player games, obviously. And so this game is going to be very disruptive to the entire creator community. I mean, let me ask you this, Perrin. As a top streamer, do you feel like folks like Shroud and all the others at the top that normally play competitive esports games and multiplayer games are almost forced to play this single player game just because of how popular it's going to be?
Yeah, I do. I mean, this one has so much hype going into it that their audiences are basically expecting them to cover it. And if they don't, as top streamers, if they don't cover it, they will actually lose their audience to other people who are covering it, to other big streamers. So at the top there, you got to remember, like, once you do the top and you've made it, you know, things aren't just rosy and green and like life's great. You still have to compete with all of the other top streamers. And if you aren't covering this, it's basically a free win for all of your competition. Everybody who was expecting you to play it would go to another stream, and that will be a sizable chunk of the audience. Will some people stay around? Let's say Shroud just does Valorant more, and will some of his audience stick around? Sure, they will, but he's definitely going to lose out a bunch of his audience to another streamer, and he doesn't want that. So he's going to cover this hopefully as quickly as he can, or he hopes so anyway, so that then he can get back to doing multiplayer games, which are his bread and butter.
Ross, what are your thoughts on, you know, top streamers right now covering this game? Do you think this game has longer than a 1 month timeline in terms of being relevant for streamers, or is it going to be a spike trend that dies like the rest?
It's initially it's going to be big. I mean, I think he has a point about the single player aspect. I think we would have a lot more answers if we actually knew what the timeline on multiplayer for this game is going to be. The only thing we know right now is that multiplayer is going to come out after the first DLC. And we also know that CD Projekt Red is treating Cyberpunk's multiplayer like its own entity, like its own game. So it's almost going to be a completely separate game. So I think that almost brings up the question, is there any strategy where you can ignore Cyberpunk's single player game and then jump in when the multiplayer releases, or do you have to get your foot in the door now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So we have run strategies in the past and grown multiple YouTube channels and what have you, and done our own strategies in the past with various games and covering them pre-release. And then when you cover them pre-release and you hype up these games, you can build an audience for a game that doesn't exist, right? So that when the game drops, your audience is primed and ready, and you can stream to that audience, and you can benefiting from the audience that you built pre-release. Now, top streamers like Shroud, they already have a massive audience. So if they stream to, you know, on Twitch, Cyberpunk 2077, they're basically guaranteed to get views from that. That's great. But for the rest of you, how do you get an audience for this game? So right in the launch window of mega titles, and we've covered mega titles in the past, Perrin, we've done this a bunch actually in the past, and right in the launch window, every YouTuber on the whole planet is going to jump on board Cyberpunk 2077. So as a small creator, there's virtually no growth opportunity for you when this game launches. But the window you want to be looking at actually is after the game launches. You want to be looking at those times and those opportunities and that content that allows you to punch through when the competition is lower. And I know you have successfully built audiences that way, Perrin. So why don't you tell us about some of your experiments in the past capitalizing on game launches so that people who are looking to cover Cyberpunk 2077 can learn from them?
Yeah, and so one of my greatest successes as a live streamer and content creator came from like pre-building on a trend. I did this with an old MMORPG that doesn't exist anymore, actually, called WildStar. And a year in advance, a whole entire year, I started doing YouTube content. I built a website, like a fan site for it, and I live streamed anything I could find as much as I possibly could. Before that, I did it with Star Wars: The Old Republic, with you too, AWOL. We pre-built content for a year or even further in advance, regularly taking any nugget of new info and just expanding and building as much content as we could based off of that. We were able to grow a really sizable audience with basically no competition doing that. Now, nowadays, that strategy is more caught on, so you will have more competition. And with a game like Cyberpunk, even if you had started a year or more ago, you would have had some competition. But it's the better time as a small or medium-sized creator to build, because then when the game does launch, you have an audience that can pull you through, but you're still not going to grow when it launches because you have to compete with literally the rest of the internet. So you're not going to be able to grow there. Your growth mainly comes from pre-launch content. So if you haven't already done that, it's probably too late on Cyberpunk for that now. That's something you want to look at a year in advance. And then the one thing to expect is after launch, you're not going to have much to do after launch. Your viewership will go down. Your concurrence will go down. Your views will go down in most cases. There are cases where creators have built their success off of this. Typical gamer, AWOL comes to mind, who did this for GTA 5, but GTA 5 was like one of the biggest games ever to hit. Maybe that could be done with Cyberpunk 2077. We will see. It's a gamble every time on how well the game is going to do. And if the game does really, really well, you could blow up like typical gamer. If the game fails and doesn't even exist anymore, like WildStar, you could end up like me. So it can go both ways. But it's a good strategy to do, but it's caught on and is more competitive now than it used to be.
Well, let's talk about what people could do potentially to win on Cyberpunk 2077. So for all of you guys out there, first of all, that are planning to stream this game when it launches, I can understand the idea of, I'm going to be playing this game anyway, so why not stream it? That's cool. Just so you know, this will probably be statistically, and we will analyze this afterwards. Statistically, this will probably be the worst game you have ever streamed in terms of your performance. Now, there's going to be some exceptions, but I think as far as like record-breaking numbers for launches of games, this game will have the highest streaming numbers of all time. And so the competition will be maximum here. And so your discoverability streaming Cyberpunk 2077 on any platform, even DLive, Trovo, Facebook Gaming, etc., for all of you guys out there that are restreaming because we've recommended it in the past, your odds of breaking through on any platform are next to none, especially with this game. Think like Fortnite at its most popular state times like 3, 4, 5 within this launch window of the first week of the game coming out. So if you just want to stream for fun, if you don't care if your viewership is way lower than normal, if you're cool just streaming to just a few viewers, that's great. But just keep in mind that there are big creators out there that have been pre-planning their Cyberpunk 2077 launch content, and they're planning to go big with this. Like Dr. Disrespect, for example, has a whole production planned. He's been hyping up and talking about. It's my guess that he's got entire skits, sets, graphics packages, shorts, collaborations with CD Projekt Red. Like we're talking maybe like a six-figure, like you dropped maybe a couple $100,000 if I were to guess, on planning for the launch of this game. So if you're a YouTube streamer, for example, that's who you're competing against. Is this like AAA production streamer who has been doing way more planning than you have in building up their audience waiting for this moment. So that in mind, building up your audience waiting for this moment is the strategy you need to be thinking of if you're looking to cover a game like Cyberpunk 2077. And with the multiplayer coming up, that's a potential opportunity to grow. So Ross, what are your if we were to guess right now, with Cyberpunk multiplayer and CD Projekt Red's history of delaying games 2 trillion times. I mean, they said it's going to be at least a year after launch. So what do you think creators should plan on if we were just to guess today?
A year. I think right now, I think the release for multiplayer, if I had to put a guess on it, which could be very wrong, because like you said, they tend to delay things quite a bit. I would say next November, right around holiday 2021 would be my best bet for it. And just to clarify, because I feel like we gave off some mixed messages here. When we said, we talked about big streamers, like you kind of have to if you're already a big streamer, but small streamers, are we even recommending streaming single player?
No.
Okay.
Do not stream it. Like, it's not a mixed message. Like, stream it if you want to have fun. I was trying to say stream it if you want to have fun. If you're going to be playing it anyway, that's cool. That's fine. I would recommend taking off your Facebook gaming stream. Well, actually, let me ask the Facebook gaming expert here, Perrin. If you're streaming Cyberpunk 2077 at launch or any other game that's new and a big game, do you think you should take that off of your Facebook gaming live stream or restream, and why?
So with a PC game like Cyberpunk, I wouldn't expect it to do well in Facebook gaming. But because Facebook gaming is a little bit newer, you could test 1 or 2, but you'll know instantly from those 1 or 2 whether it's going to be good or not. If that first one is dramatically less concurrent viewership than what you normally get, which it most likely will, then don't do another one. You'll just burn yourself on the algo. You don't want to do that. So, I hope that there's more of a PC audience coming into Facebook gaming, but that's probably not going to be the case. So you can do one test. If that test tells you anything bad, then don't do any more than that.
That makes sense. And so, folks that are looking forward, so Ross predicted a moment ago, CD Projekt Red will release multiplayer a year from now. That would be in 2021. I'm going to not say definitely not, 100% not happening. I would say 2022 at the very earliest, I would say. So they are going to take their sweet time with this. They are clearly trying to do something new. This is something they've never done before as a company. They just onboarded top talent to kind of to start working on the game. They just onboarded a creative director for the game 2 months ago. There is no way it's coming out in a year. At least 2 years on this thing, maybe 3 years if I were to guess. And CD Projekt Red doesn't necessarily even have pressure to finish the multiplayer game early because the main game is going to sell so well, and the expansions they're going to release for it are going to sell so incredibly well, and all of the franchises they're building on top of it are going to sell so incredibly well that actually the longer they wait for multiplayer to come out, the better for it from a marketing perspective, because it'll be that much more anticipated. And so I think it's actually better for them from a marketing standpoint for it to come out a couple years later, 2 or 3 years later. They get more time to polish it, which CD Projekt Red delays all their major games recently by 3, 4, 5 times. So they'll probably say it's coming out Christmas next year, and then they'll delay it to the next year for sure. And then number 2, there's going to be Cyberpunk 2077 fatigue in the market, with it hitting every billboard, every advertisement, every single channel, every creator. People are going to need a break on some Cyberpunk for a while before they're going to be really open and excited again about the multiplayer version of the game. What do you guys think? Do you guys think I'm totally off base there?
We don't know. We don't. The thing is, we don't have any information. Literally, the only quote, and I got it right here, that they've ever said about multiplayer is, and I quote, "It's a separate, dedicated production, a big production. We think about it as a standalone product." So that's all we know. And I think they briefly mentioned that it's going to come out after the first DLC, but we don't even know when that first DLC is coming out. That first DLC may not even come out until holiday 2021. So if that's the case, then yeah, it's probably going to be pushed back even farther. I think it's going to be interesting, and these are 2 completely separate entities. I know, trust me. But to see, I'm curious to see if Halo, what they do with their multiplayer, and if that has any effect on what CD Projekt Red does, because you learn off each other's failures. And I think that we're all kind of on the same page right now that the Halo multiplayer is probably going to be a failure. So they may even decide to push it back even farther or push it up. I think what these other games going into next gen are going to be doing with separate multiplayer platforms could sway them, potentially to push it back or move it up.
I don't think that Halo's multiplayer is a competitor that much with Cyberpunk 2070, with Cyberpunk Online.
Oh, no, it's
I think
exclusive, so no, it's not. But
right. Well, yeah, but it's going to be, from my understanding, we don't know that much about either multiplayer, of course. But what you can imagine is that Halo's multiplayer is just going to be like a standard shooter. So maybe they're going to do arena shooter, maybe they're going to do battle royale. It's just going to be PvP stuff. Cyberpunk Online, most likely, if we were to guess what it's going to be like, it's going to be more like the Division 2. It's going to be more like GTA Online, which is a totally different experience, right? It's all about maybe racing and collecting cars. It's all about doing some sort of RPG elements and then looting and leveling up and crushing bosses and doing raids and doing these unlimited content tasks with a sprinkling of PvP in there, here and there. That's most likely what they're going to be doing with Cyberpunk Online, if I were to guess. And that's going to help differentiate it from all those mega titles that are out there right now, like Apex Legends and Fortnite and PUBG and you name it, Valorant, that are dominating the PvP shooter space. I think Halo is going to try to move into a much more competitive space with their multiplayer, because that's what their player base wants. Their player base wants arena shooter. Like that's what Halo is, and they're going to deliver that. And then they're going to go into the most competitive space for that right now with that element of their game. And obviously they're going to probably fail unless it's absolutely phenomenal, because they also have to go up against Overwatch and they have to go up against CS:GO and all of these unbelievable games that have had, in some cases, 10 plus years to simmer in the pot and get perfect. And they're going to go, let's compete with that. Whereas Cyberpunk Online, if it only competes with GTA Online or The Division 2, there's not that many kind of open world, massively multiplayer games out there that are successful for them to have to go up against. And with so many people already having, tens of millions of people potentially purchasing a copy of the main Cyberpunk game, already having it downloaded, already in love with the universe, that's going to be an amazing launching pad for them to potentially get that multiplayer off the ground. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Do you guys agree with my kind of like the way I'm kind of seeing these multiplayer games fitting into the competition and the streaming and creator landscape? What do you think?
I do. I agree with you. I want to like rewind this a little bit and simplify. You know, why are we talking so much about multiplayer on Cyberpunk and Halo and GTA? Why are we focused on multiplayer right now? We're focused on multiplayer because for creators, multiplayer is how you grow. For live streamers, multiplayer is the better way to grow than single player. This is why Shroud is like, I don't give a fuck about single player, because he's a multiplayer streamer, and multiplayer games are the top streamed games. It's easy because they're more participatory. It's a level of experience above single player, and that stream viewers aren't just watching a streamer, but you can actually participate and play with someone that you're watching live. It is the ultimate immersive live streaming experience, and it's just way better than single player. And this is supposed to be an immersive game, Cyberpunk 2077, so it makes sense that the demand would be there for viewers to be able to play this immersive game with the streamer that they love the most. So it's kind of a shame that multiplayer isn't coming at launch, because I think that is the mega appeal for streamers. And that's why we're talking about it. That's why we care about multiplayer, because that's where the growth opportunity is, because that's what the viewers want. I mean, that is, you as live stream viewers, don't you prefer to play or actually experience something with the streamer? And those of you who are streaming, don't your viewers ask you if they can play with you? I get this every time I stream. And if I don't, they leave, because they know I normally do play with viewers, because it's a better experience. That's why multiplayer is going to be important here. This is why Shroud doesn't care about single player, because he can't play with the other people that he plays games with. He can't play with his viewers. There's nothing there but a story experience that everybody else is streaming pretty much the same thing. Yeah, the story can vary depending on your choices, etc., but it's the same game. So I just wanted to highlight that, because we were getting in the weeds on multiplayer a bit, but that's why it's very, very important. So if you aren't streaming a multiplayer game, you're actually kind of missing out on a potentially really engaging dynamic, one of the most engaging dynamics that live streamers bring to the table, and that's the participatory experience.
Yeah. Also, the other thing to remember, oh, sorry, Russ. I was just real quick and I'll go to you. The other thing to remember is that multiplayer games have unlimited content. So that's like the reason why they can be streamed, right? You can play the same map over and over and over again, and it's new content every time because there's a new configuration of enemies and new things happen every time because it's PvP. So the only games that are successful for streamers are ones that have unlimited content. And then the second note is Shroud is a former professional CSGO player. So obviously he wants to play multiplayer games. He's like one of the best shooters, like mechanically, of all time, of any human being that's ever existed. So of course he wants to be shooting people in multiplayer games. But go ahead, back to you, Ross.
No, I was just gonna say that we're just spitballing here. Like I said, we don't know any information. The game hasn't even launched yet. It doesn't launch for another week. And surely to God, whatever happens with their launch, I'm sure it's going to be massive. But that's probably going to have a major influence on when they release multiplayer. Likely right now, if I had to guess, CD Projekt Red doesn't even have a timeline for releasing multiplayer. But that doesn't mean it couldn't be next year. That doesn't mean it couldn't be in 2023.
All they said is that it's going to be at least a year. And folks that are looking to grow as streamers, and if you're insisting on streaming Cyberpunk 2077, you got to restream at least to try to squeeze something out of it. Ross, tell them what they can win if they buy Restream.
If you buy Restream right now, and I'm going to drop this little code in here, you're going to get 30% off your first month. Restream gives you access to multiple platforms at the same time. Stop wasting your time just streaming to one. Go to Twitch, go to YouTube, go to Facebook, go to Periscope, Trovo, DLive. Go to all of them, Restream everywhere. Figure out what works for you, and then make your decision if you want to go exclusive or not once you've got a built-up audience on multiple platforms.
That makes sense. So this game is a spike trend. Really quick, Perrin, before we end this one today, I want to show the trend on the screen. Can you pull up any other single player game on Google Trends and just show them? I mean, you could maybe even pull up multiple trends on there. We want to literally show you the numbers. This isn't just like, we just think this is going to happen with Cyberpunk. Literally every single player game that has ever existed and released has followed the exact same trend over and over and over again. And it looks like Perrin's already pulling up The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. You could also pull up any God of War title here. You could pull up Spider-Man Miles Morales here. And all of the trends would look identical. Perrin, tell them about the different cycles of these trends and why this is another reason why single player games are not good for creators.
So all these trends always look the same. There's always no traction, and we won't see this here. We're going to need past 5 years on God of War. There is little traction. God of War shows it really, really well. If you're watching this red spike, if you notice there's little spikes pre-launch, this is where, the developer and publisher are feeding us juicy info that we can care about while we're building up hype and anticipation. And then you have launch, and launch is always this same spike for every single player game ever. This is exactly how the trend works. You get the launch spike, and it does not last long. Almost immediately, if you look at this, so the launch is here. Maybe I can zoom in a little bit. It's in May. Not even like a month later, it's already almost completely back down. June, July, by 2 months, it's almost back down to the bottom. Normally by month 3, the spike trend is completely back down to its normal line where it was pre-launch. So that means you've got 3 months to be in that spike trend, and afterwards, it's gone. It's absolutely gone, and you're back down to where you were almost where you were pre-launch. Now, if it's a great game, you'll have a little bit like of room there, even after 3 months, to get like a little bit of growth where the other big competition will leave because they know this formula. I guarantee you every big streamer knows this formula. Oh, single player game? I got 3 months. 3 months top. And I need to hit it really hard in month 1. Otherwise, there's no point because you're not getting the increased search. All this spike means is that there's been increased search demand on the internet for this particular title. And then when it declines, it means search interest is gone, so that means less discoverability. So you have to build around that 3 months. It's always the same for every single game, even like the most successful games, unless it has multiplayer, like Minecraft, like GTA 5 multiplayer. Then that can be a little bit different. You can see a little bit more. You can see more spiking coming on down the road. The single player games are always the same.
Yep, they always die fast. And so Shroud is excited about this title. He hopes it's next gen. obviously, like a lot of other people, they're excited about Cyberpunk 2077. But at the end of the day, every single player game that's ever existed, with the exception of ones that have modding enabled, die immediately. They spike up and then they die immediately, usually within a few months, like Perrin said. There are no exceptions. Just that's it. Now, horror games, you could say horror games sometimes have a little bit of a longer lifetime. Okay, there's like a couple. And then maybe Minecraft. Okay, maybe Roblox, but Roblox is multiplayer and Minecraft ended up being multiplayer too. So it's really hard to find an example of like a single player traditional RPG that had any sustainability over time. They almost all spiked and then died. And they'll get mini spikes when DLC comes out and they'll die after that. So Shroud's wish that this game will die after a month will probably come true, and he can get back to doing Shroud things. We love Shroud and his ridiculous beard. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Digital Drop Podcast.